Right. So again, welcome everyone. Glad to have you with us today. My name is Michelle Beloskur. I am the director for the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, or you'll hear me call it MIPN. We're going to be talking today about Midwest priority plants and also talk about some of the changes to invasive plant regulations across the region and some other work that's happening with assessments and changes to regulations across the region. We are recording this webinar, so you'll be able to go back and take a look at it later on MIPN's YouTube channel. And I also want to acknowledge we have Emily Finch with us today. She's a MIPN board member. She's also the invasive species specialist for the Martin Davies and Orange County Soil and Water Conservation District. And she's going to be helping moderate the chat and dropping some, I think, important links in there as well. So be sure to keep an eye on the chat and please use it to submit any questions that you have. All right. So just very briefly about MIPN, we've been around since 2006. We're here to coordinate across agencies and organizations in our Midwest region with the goal of reducing the impacts of invasive plants. A lot of that work is geared towards early detection of invasive plants, as well as making sure that we are understanding and sharing information on best management practices as well. I want to give a shout out to our 2025 sponsors. We've had a lot of support from other organizations over the last year and individuals as well. But these are our most current sponsors. So thank you to the Invasive Species Center of Ontario for control. They do vegetation management based out of Wisconsin, and Cortiva AgriScience. We appreciate their support. And if your organization would like to be a sponsor, my contact information will be available at the end, and we'd love to have you join us. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I just want to make sure you're aware of MIPN's region. So we cover 9 states as well as the province of Ontario. So we're going to be talking about early detection, priority species in the Midwest, and it's just good to be aware that not every plant that we're going to talk about today is necessarily an early detection plant all across this region, right? If you're in Southern Indiana, Northern Kentucky, your early detection concerns are probably going to be a little bit different than if you're in Northern Minnesota. And we'll try to address some of that regionality as we go through today. But the main thing I want to focus our time on today is the results of our annual Emerging Invasives survey. So MIPN has been doing these surveys almost annually since 2020. We did not do one in 2021, but we have 4 years that we've been doing a very similar kind of questionnaire. And we very deliberately solicit feedback from invasive species experts across our region. We try to get responses from every state and province. And this year we gave them a list of 28 terrestrial and 11 aquatic invasive plants and asked them to, and you could also, add a species if it wasn't on this list. But that was kind of the list we gave everyone to choose from. And we asked these experts to tell us which of these are of greatest concern where they are working or researching. And when we talk about early detection species, these are plants that are either not in the Midwest yet, but they're knocking on our door. They're prevalent or they're spreading in neighboring regions, or they are here, but they're in small isolated populations or maybe in subregions of the Midwest. But in those cases, we're very concerned because there's a high chance of further spread. And so we got feedback from 52 individuals. 9 out of 10 states and provinces were represented. Unfortunately, we didn't get any responses from Missouri this year. But we got feedback from, I think, really valuable sources. These are people who are doing a lot of work on the ground or who are connected to invasive species monitoring and management. So about half of the responses came either from county staff or multi-county, which generally translates to a CISMA or CWMA. So that is a cooperative invasive species management area or cooperative weed management area. About 30% were from state or province agency staff. And then the remaining 20%, and these are averages, was a mix. So we had a little bit of tribal, we had one tribal response, one national, a couple university folks, a couple nonprofits, and a few commercial entities such as nurseries. So good responses. And here, should have done a little drum roll there. Our most frequently cited and terrestrial invasive plants were Japanese stiltgrass and lesser celandine. And if you have your ear to the ground, so to speak, on invasive plants, these probably aren't a huge surprise. But there's pretty good consensus that these plants are problematic in our region. They are actively spreading and are a high priority for continued monitoring and management and containment so they don't further increase their range. If you're not familiar with either of these plants, MIPN did do a webinar on each of these in 2023. We had really expert presenters. We had Chris Evans from University of Illinois Extension talked about stiltgrass, and Kurt Dreisilker from the Morton Arboretum talked about lesser celandine. So stiltgrass is a warm annual grass. It puts on a lot of its growth in the summer. It really likes moist bottomlands, but it can grow just about anywhere, even in deep shade. Its introduction was traced back to packing material, and it's very, I'll show you a range map in just a moment, but a couple of things to know about it, if you're not familiar with it again, is it does get its name stiltgrass because its roots kind of look like they're on stilts. They have these aerial roots that arise a little higher on the stem. It often has a white or silvery midrib on the leaves, and it tends to leave a lot of thatch, beigey thatch behind it. So you can even identify it in the winter if you know what you're looking for. It does pull out of the ground easily, so if you're not sure if it's stiltgrass, I know that's one of the kind of little cheat codes to helping to identify it. And one good thing we know about it is the seed bank is not particularly long-lived. So even though it's very prolific and definitely can be a challenge to manage, getting at the reducing the seed production is really key to this plant. Lesser celandine, it really likes moving along waterways. And let me go to the next slide to show you a little more about that. So here's on the left is the range of Japanese stiltgrass, and you can see what I'm talking about. If you're in, southern Indiana, or you're in Kentucky, you probably don't need me to tell you about stiltgrass. But these range maps are from EdMaps. And I just downloaded these this week, so they're very current. And you can see there's no reports, for example, in Minnesota currently. Doesn't mean it's not there, but there's no official reports. So definitely still a very important priority to be monitoring and managing this plant to try and contain it and prevent further spread. Lesser celandine, you don't see it as widespread. Quite a few reports in Ohio and some other areas. But what you do see, for example, I'm in Michigan, and I can tell you that the green highlighted counties where you see it's been reported almost exactly follows the Grand River, which is the longest river in Michigan, and it's where there's been a lot of lesser celandine reports. It really likes to move along waterways. It's probably the same situation you're seeing down here in Ohio and Kentucky along the Ohio River. It's a really, it produces these little bulbils at the leaf axil, which can contribute to, they can get into, if they get high floodwaters, it can move that um, downstream and really cause a lot of proliferation. So it is, both of these definitely are valuable plants to know and understand. And again, we have in-depth webinars on both of those on MIPN's YouTube channel, or you can go to the website where you registered for this webinar and you can find links there. Oh, and one last thing I'll say about celandine. There's a very cool new coalition called the Lesser Celandine Coalition in Michigan. And they are working with some folks over in Illinois who've also had a lot of success in managing this plant. And so they're trying to put together, really just bring a lot of partners together who care about managing this plant, put together good management practices. So I'm going to ask Emily, if you can drop that link in the chat. It's ioniacd.org/lesser dash celandine. Good read. It's pretty new, but I think it's going to be a good group to keep track of. Now, I'm not going to go into that much detail about all of these plants today, but since those were our most reported, I wanted to talk about those in a little more detail. But this is a list of other terrestrial invasive plants that continue to be of high concern. So these have appeared in our surveys repeatedly. They continue to be cited by many experts across the region. Again, some of these are going to be, again, if you are in more the southern parts of the Midwest, calorie pear, for example, is not going to be a surprise to you. But some of these are still in smaller pockets, black swallowwort, myla minute-weed, for example. Japanese chaff flower, we've got common teasel. That's a big concern, I know, in Iowa, Minnesota area. Also on this list, we had poison hemlock, Palmer amaranth, which is a big concern because of its impacts on crops, and then Amur cork tree I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. And again, I keep talking about these MIPN webinars, but there are good resources already out there if you want to learn more about how to identify and manage any of these plants. We have webinars on, we have a teasel poison hemlock 2-for-1 webinar. You can hear Emily present at that one. We have swallowwort, one on chaff flower, one on myla minute-weed, and one on Japanese hop. So you can get a lot more information on any of these by watching those webinars. And also, Emily, don't let me forget to mention the new kudzu video, because we're going to talk about that plant in a minute too. All right, this is a lot of information, I know. So just bear with me, but I know some people really like to see the data. So this is the full list of all the terrestrial plants that we provided as options in our survey, and all the responses that we got, including which state or province responded. So you can see at the top of our list, there's Japanese stiltgrass, lesser celandine, and you can see some others that we're going to talk about, porcelain berry, kudzu. But you can see some, as you get down about halfway, you start to seeing some interesting plants. And I will tell you that we're starting to see increases in things like wineberry, red hailstone. We've seen some increased feedback on that. Butterbur or Petasites is an interesting one. There is a group in Michigan, the Citizen Science Program called the Priority Plant Patrol, where they're very focused on doing monitoring for this plant. So some regional concerns to be aware of. And that, just go back for 1 second. And this is available if you go to our Prevent and Detect webpage, and I'll have a link for that in just a few minutes. You can find a summary of everything I'm talking about today, and it includes this chart. But what might be most interesting is terrestrial plants where we're seeing an increase in how many times these plants are cited in our survey. So again, we have results from 22 through 24, with the exception of 2021. And I plucked these out because we really saw a spike in how many times we had responses on these plants. So porcelain berry is one where we just had a couple of people tell us that it was a priority concern in 2020, and now we have this past year almost 20. You see the same thing with kudzu, miscanthus, which is maidenhair grass or Chinese silvergrass, winter creeper, chocolate vine, and non-native crab apples, which we'll talk about in a minute. Again, I just want to let you know if you want to learn more about porcelain berry, that's a woody vine, and it is, we have a webinar on that. That was done again in 2022. Kudzu, there was a really nice video that was done just last year on identifying and managing kudzu in Indiana. And so there is a link that I think Emily will drop in the chat for you, that you can see a real live infestation in Indiana and hear about, again, how to identify it and good management strategies. If you'd like to learn more about miscanthus, there was a webinar that MIPN just did last year that included a lot of really good information on miscanthus and Johnson grass and other invasive grasses. And then there's some other interesting things happening. Winter creeper is a plant that is being assessed by at least a couple of states in our region right now, so there's a growing concern about that. Chocolate vine, Akebia quinnata, which is the plant you see pictured on this slide, and it was also the flower on the opening slide. That's an interesting one. Not modest levels of feedback on this plant. It may be that its spread is really needs very specific conditions in order to be problematic, but it just keeps being kind of keeps consistently kind of appearing and slightly increasing over time. So that's another one to keep an eye on. But crab apples are particularly interesting. And of course, we're talking about non-native crab apples, not any native varieties. They're a very popular landscape tree. Many of you may have them on your property. But there is a growing, people are starting to notice more and more that some of these non-native hybrid, uh, well, let me step back a second. So crab apples are hybridized very readily, and so they can be very, very difficult to identify. On top of that, we're seeing them pop up in natural areas, places where they've not been intentionally planted. In some places, it's actually creating a carpet in natural areas to the point where some people have even expressed concern that this could be our next calorie pair. So Dawes Arboretum has really been leading the charge in understanding this a little bit better, and they very generously provided a contribution to our blog that we maintain on the Woody Invasives of the Great Lakes Collaborative site, woodyinvasives.org. So that's a really nice summary of what they have observed and the genetic work that they're undertaking to try to better understand which particular species are contributing to this population explosion that we're seeing. And if you want to hear more about that research, we've invited a couple of their staff to come and talk to us in August and do a webinar on that topic specifically. So I'm very interested in that. I've heard these two women speak before, and they're very good presenters. We also had a few plants that had never been reported in our survey before. And I just want to, make it clear, we've only had maybe one or two people who cited these plants as high priority. Most of the reports came from Indiana, with the exception of yellow archangel was reported by someone in Minnesota, and the innula was from Wisconsin. I've plucked out a couple to just touch on briefly, purple beautyberry pictured on the left and golden rain tree on the right. Um, and I'm highlighting these two because they've also been identified as a concern through another project that MIPN's involved in, which is the Public Gardens Sentinels Against Invasive Plants. So the way that program works is Public Gardens and Arboreta, who are, plant experts. They have very highly trained horticulturists on staff, and they curate collections of non-native plants and native too, but they bring in collections from around the world to showcase so we can learn about them, to conserve them in many cases. But they also tend to be the first people to notice when a non-native plant is problematic. It's starting to escape from where it's been planted and move into natural areas and things like that. So through this program, they monitor and they share their observations of plants that they've seen escaping. And they have, we have 59 gardens currently in the program. 9 of them, and it's across North America. 9 of these gardens, including 5 in the Midwest, have reported golden rain tree being a problem. Now, there are 3 different levels of concern. Gardens can either rank a plant as being a watch list species, which just means we're monitoring it, we're concerned, we're monitoring. It can be considered potentially invasive or invasive if there's been a high volume of spread, and if it's a plant that's also known to be problematic outside of their property, outside of the garden property. So in this case, golden rain tree was primarily considered to be a watch list plant. but a couple gardens did say it was potentially invasive. And these were gardens located in Wisconsin, Ohio, and Illinois. Um, it is listed as an invasive plant in 3 Midwest states, Minnesota, Missouri, and Ohio. So kind of growing concern about this one and one to keep an eye on. Purple beautyberry was reported by 6 of 59 participating public gardens. 2 of those were in the Midwest, in Ohio and Iowa and Ohio. Yep. But all the gardens that have reported this plant have all said watch list. So, and it's not on any, and this plant is not on any state lists either. So just want to kind of, express the level of concern here. So watching it, monitoring it. But if you have one of these on your property, and this is the non-native purple beautyberry, the Calicarpa dicomata, not the American, just to be clear about that. But good ones to keep track of. Keep an eye on my time here. So a few others that are on this list, jet bead. This is a plant that we almost considered adding to the woody invasives of the Great Lakes list, but it's not regulated by any Midwest states, and that is a requirement for being part of that listed through the collaborative. But it is listed by Indiana, Illinois, and Minnesota. It's considered a low to moderate threat, but it's a good one to keep an eye on. It's a shrub. It has white flowers, and as the name would suggest, it has these red berries that turn black and very bead-like. Star of Bethlehem you might be familiar with. It's kind of an herbaceous perennial. The leaf has a really kind of distinctive white stripe on it. It has white flowers. Um, it is also not a regulated plant, but it is listed by several Midwest states, including Illinois, Kentucky, Minnesota, Missouri, and Ohio. So again, another one to, if you learn to identify it, report it, that's helpful. The yellow archangel and inula are not regulated or listed by any Midwest states, so these may be more of a regional concern. The yellow archangel is very problematic in the Pacific Northwest, but it is sometimes good to learn from other regions about plants that are spreading. So I want to move on now and talk a little bit more regionally. I do think it's worth pointing out 2 plants that were kind of having an increase. We're seeing an increase in reports through our survey, but they seem to have, at least for now, kind of a regional concern level. So Himalayan balsam. We have this great photo here from the Invasive Species Center. It's a flowering. It has this beautiful kind of pink purple flower. We had no reports of this plant in 2020, and now in 2024 survey, we had 5. So not a ton, but we are seeing this kind of gradually tick up. And it's mostly being reported in northern Michigan and northern Wisconsin. So I think at this point, our advice would be if you're in those northern reaches of the Midwest, this is a good one to be aware of, to learn to identify it and report it if you see it, so we can better understand the scope of spread. And if you're in the southern Midwest, small carpet grass, especially southern Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, good to get familiar with this plant, report it if you see it so we can better understand the range there. But also, there's been no official reports in Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan, or Ontario. So it's also good to keep an eye out in these more northern areas, make sure it just hasn't been detected yet. So keep an eye out. As we know, invasive plants do like to move northward, and with climate, that will continue to be the case. So let's talk a little bit about aquatic invasives now. We don't want to leave them out. It is worth noting, you'll see in parentheses here, you see how many times these plants were named in our survey. Over half of our respondents only provided feedback on terrestrial plants. So you'll see that the aquatic numbers are lower, but that's just fewer people told us about them. But it is worth noting that everyone who told us about aquatic invasive plants mentioned hydrilla. So this is definitely one to understand and and watch for, especially if you're a boater or an angler and you're out in these in our Midwest lakes. So this is it's a submersed perennial. It's rooted, but can form some free-floating mats. It has leaves that are in whorls of 3 to 8 all along the stem. Each leaf has a serrated margin, and then there's these little teeth on the underside of the midvein that are fairly distinctive. Um, and you can see from the map here, it's not terribly widespread, but detections keep popping up. It was recently detected in Michigan, and most recently, in 2024, Ontario had their first detection. So this is a plant that is definitely on the move and expanding. So and a good reminder to, if you are a boater or a kayaker or anything like that, to make sure you clean, drain, dry your equipment so we don't allow this to continue to spread. And that's really good advice for all of these. These are some of the other aquatic plants that all of them that had at least 5 or more were named in the survey at least 5 or more times. So we see starry stonewort here on the left. Sometimes this is technically an algae. Sometimes can be confused with native muskgrass, but if you see these little white star-shaped bulbils, you know it's starry stonewort. That's a good indicator. European frogbit. This is also one that's spreading, and a really good resource if you want to learn more about it is the European Frogbit Collaborative, or EFB. Go to efbcollaborative.net. And it has these little lily pad-like leaves, but they're much smaller. They're like the size of maybe a $half. Has little three-petaled white flowers. Um, and let's see. Yeah, let's move on to flowering rush, which it's always unfortunate when these invasives are pretty, and this one's kind of pretty, but definitely another problematic one, and actually very recently regulated in Ontario as a restricted plant. And then we also have yellow floating heart. This one also is sort of lily pad looking, but you can see hopefully in the picture that the edges of the leaves are scalloped, and it has this not oversized flower, but kind of dramatic in its color, very bright colored flower with 5 petals and sort of a fringed edge to the petals. So, um, oh, and I did want to do a mention too that if you're in Minnesota, they have a very cool program for starry stonewort. They have a participatory science program called Starry Trek. So if you're in Minnesota and you want to help monitor their lakes for this plant and try to help prevent its spread, that's a really great resource. And here again, we see all of the plants that we put into our survey as options. And you can see all the ones I've mentioned so far. We also had a handful of reports of parrot feather, rough mannagrass, water lettuce, water primrose, water chestnut, and water soldier. And those last two, I just want to point out, we also have MIPN webinars on those topics. In 2024, we had a webinar on a very inspiring webinar on invasive plants, which you don't get a lot of those, on the successful management efforts that are taking place in Ontario, and then also one on water soldier in 2023. It really is if you watch that, there's some very dramatic imagery of how extensively water soldier had spread again in Ontario, and then the management success they were having. And it's especially important if you're someone who likes to recreate in water, because the edges of these water soldier leaves are very sharp to the point where if you're swimming in the water, they can even cut you. So definitely one that we don't want to see spread. So everything that I'm covering today, there is a summary version of this on our website. It's just a 2-page document, but those charts I showed you of all the different plants and which states reported them and how many times. And then there's also another document that's a year-by-year comparison. So any plant that's ever been named in one of our surveys, whether it was on our list of options or not, or just entered in manually, is included on here, and you can see if our numbers of reports have increased or if they've decreased. And again, keeping in mind that this is not a highly scientific survey, right? It's more of just gathering feedback, but we are gathering that feedback from um, people who are um, considered experts in the field of invasive plants. And then I just wanted to take a moment to bring your attention to an early detection resource you might not be familiar with. I did mention the Public Gardens as Sentinels Against Invasive Plants earlier, and there's a QR code on the screen here to take you directly to the website. But there is a very cool dashboard that is publicly available, and what you can see here is how many gardens are participating. I mentioned we had 59 currently. Um, and it shows you all the states and provinces that are highlighted is where we have participating gardens. And then what's probably most interesting is the most commonly recorded taxa section. So you can see this is North American wide. Oh goodness, I'm sorry about that. You can see that Philodendron amurense, this is Amur cork tree that we mentioned earlier as a plant that comes up commonly in our surveys. Is the most widely reported plant by our participating public gardens. And because of that and some other compelling um, attributes of the plant, our program created what's called a plant alert. It tells you what we've learned from public gardens who have been observing this plant, and it has recommended actions to help prevent the further spread of this particular plant. And I bring the plant alerts up because we're actually in the process of developing some new plants for the coming year. And I can't say for certain now which ones they're going to cover, but I think it will be some of the plants we've talked about today. You can see on this list here, Chloroteria, this is the golden rain tree that I mentioned earlier. Um, Winter creepers on this list, Euonymus fortunei. Um, and one of the other things you can do with this map here is you can select a specific state or group of states, and this most commonly recorded taxa graph will change to just show you which taxa are most often reported in your area. So some good resources to know and be aware of. And then I would be remiss if I didn't encourage you to report sightings of any of these plants or any other invasive plants that you may be familiar with to identify. I didn't include iNaturalist on here, but that's also a good option. I know EdMaps at least pulls in data from iNaturalist periodically, so that's also a good option. And NAS is for more specifically for aquatic invasives. And then some additional resources I just want to bring your attention to that can help with management and early detection. I've mentioned several times that MIPN has a host of webinars. And hopefully you'll be able to find that's how you registered for today's webinar. We have a controlled database. So if you're looking for management options, that database covers 48 different plants, and so you can do a search and come up with both manual and chemical control options that are available, that have been vetted. On our Prevent and Detect webpage is where you can find the summary that I showed you of everything we're talking about today, as well as the year-by-year comparison of what we have seen from our surveys. And also on the Prevent and Detect webpage, we have for all of our early detection plants in the Midwest, we have species-specific resources, so fact sheets or informational links that can help you with, again, with ID and management. And then woody invasives of the Great Lakes, I mentioned as well. Obviously, that's for woody invasive plants, but there's a lot of information there on management, on landscape alternatives that are non-invasive or native, how those plants are regulated across the Great Lakes, and as well as also our blog, where you can find that article on crab apples I was telling you about. And we also have a very cool new resource. I want to give a shout out again to Emily. She did the heavy lift in putting these together, and they're available through the MIPN store. So if you're newer or just want a refresher on these different management techniques, we have cards on cut stump herbicide application, basal bark, and hack and squirt, and also some information on the back of each of those about integrated pest management. So that's a really nice resource if you're doing herbicide application to manage invasives. All right, so the rest of our time together, I want to talk about regulatory activity throughout the Midwest. So the first one to just highlight some recent changes. So Ontario has the most recent updates. They added several plants to their invasive list, both their prohibited and the restricted list. They also added some fish and some mammals as well, but I'm just going to be talking about the plants today. So they added oxygen weed and salvinia to their prohibited list. They added 5 plants to their restricted, including Eurasian watermilfoil, floating primrose willow, flowering rush, tree of heaven, and azolla species, or water ferns. I have to give a shout out to Ohio for being the first state to ban the sale, planting, and distribution of Calorie pear. And Minnesota is actually in a phase-out period, and Calorie pear will be a restricted plant in Minnesota come 2026. They've also had several updates that took place in 2023, that including Amur cork tree, which I mentioned earlier. That is now a specially regulated plant, and that effectively means that only male cultivars can be sold. So male cultivar meaning plants that do not produce seed, as that is the primary way in which that plant spreads. But there is a lot of other work in progress. So I'm just gonna, I know these are not the prettiest slides that I have, so just bear with me. There's only a couple. In Wisconsin, they have an invasive species rule called the NR40 rule. And their Invasive Species Council last year organized a review of over 40 species. They invited feedback on their recommendations, which included, adding new plants, changing the way plants are regulated, or even deregulating some. And those recommendations have been sent to the DNR. There is a 30-day or 30-month, excuse me, kind of review process. So this is still very much a work in progress, but it is happening. The Illinois Invasive Species Council had um, a period of inactivity, but they reformed in 2021 and have been very active. They assessed 12 species over the last couple of years and have recommended all the plants you see listed here, recommend that they be designated as invasive. It may be under their Exotic Weed Act or their Noxious Weed Act, and I'm not just going to get into all the details on that. They are actively working on getting that information posted to their website, so keep an eye out for that. And they have 8 new assessments that are slated for 2025 for the species that you see listed here. The Ohio Invasive Plant Council is also very active. They assessed 8 plants just in the last month, and they offered a 30-day comment period. And I'll just highlight this first bullet point. So Viburnum opulus, common barberry, yellow flag iris, and wineberry were all scored as invasive or potentially invasive. And those recommendations have been sent off to their state agency. So just a couple more. Missouri has a Stop the Sale initiative. So Senate Bill 105 aims to stop the sale of 5 invasive plants. There's winter creeper, Japanese honeysuckle, Sericea lespedeza, burning bush, and Calorie pear. They held a public hearing last month, so that is a very active process right now. And then Emily, feel free to chime in on this one. Indiana Native Plant Society started an online petition last year. They want to amend the Indiana terrestrial invasive plant rule and by adding 12 plant species and effectively banning their sale, distribution, and transport. So there's the list of the 12 right there. And then one other thing that's very much under development, there has been interest from several of our partners to develop a subcommittee on cultivar assessments. Cultivars are kind of tricky. There's not a lot of standards. And so when plant councils or state agencies try to assess plants, how to assess cultivars accurately, understanding how to factor in their level of sterility, for example, there's a lot of questions. So we are working to kind of put together a group of interested folks across the region. So this will be a multi-state committee to try and work on that and provide some clarity for people doing this important work. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of wind up here by letting you know if you want to stay connected to MIPN and stay updated on these kind of topics. We have a quarterly newsletter that you can sign up for on our homepage. We have a listserv. We're pretty active on social media. I mentioned our YouTube channel where all our webinars live. This is the direct link to that. And then you can always just email me if you have any questions. And we're happy to offer these webinars, free of charge. But we are in our active fundraising season. So if you are able to contribute, $5 today, $50, whatever works for you, it's all very appreciated. Um, and if you would rather, instead of doing a direct donation, if you'd rather have something a little more fun, we are currently selling MIPN merch. We have t-shirts and sweatshirts and a few different themes to choose from. So that is another fun way to support the work that we do. So with that, I think we probably have time for questions.
There was one question a little while back about if there were any one-pagers, handouts for Malice. I didn't know of any offhand. We did get another link put in the chat for Flora of North America webpage on Malice species, and then I also did put in there the blog post has a contact at the end of it for folks that are interested in more information.
I think that's probably the best. That's the best source right now. I think once there's a little more understanding of again, the species through the genetic work, better understanding of which species is contributing to spread, then it'll be easier to develop a fact sheet or some informational guidance. Right now, Malus turingo is how they're keying things out, but that they're not adhering too hard to that just yet until this genetic work gets done.
But that was it for what I saw for any
Oh,
questions in the comments. I don't know if anyone has any other questions. I did not put the links to all the regulatory pages for the states, but if anyone needs those, we can certainly get you those as well.
yeah, I'll just go back for a quick second here. Yeah, so yeah, you should be able to find the Wisconsin Invasive Species Rule has a pretty solid website, as does the Ohio Invasive Plant Council, the Illinois one. You're not going to find updates just yet, but they are working on it. Um, if you Google Missouri Stop the Sale, that one's pretty easy to find. Um, I I know I have been to the Indiana Native Plant Society's webpage, and I think there is information here about um, the dozen plants that they're looking to have added to the rule. Is that correct, Emily?
Um, so the online petition was separate from the actual regulatory stuff.
Okay.
They do have the update on when they assessed those new species, and then they have the current regulatory information.
Okay.
The regulatory update is taking a big process just because of how state government and regulations work. So it's in process, but with no clear timeline right now, unfortunately. So
Yeah, these things take time. Okay, well, I appreciate everybody being here with us today. If you think of a question after the fact, or want, resources and any of the, I know we had to go through some of those plants really quickly. So if you're looking for resources, I would highly recommend going to MIPN.org and then going to our Prevent and Detect section of our website. And we do have a lot of species-specific resources there, or you can scroll through the webinars we have available. If you can't find what you're looking for, I'm more than happy to try and connect you to a good resource on any of the plants that we've talked about today. Okay. And yeah, I think then we're all set to wrap up. I was checking the chat myself just to make sure I hadn't missed anything recent. But all right, thank you all for for being here today. Um, and let's keep in touch. Come to our next webinar, April 2nd. I'm going to be talking about wild parsnip and prairies. All right, have a good day, everyone.